Long ago, before the great kingdoms were divided by walls, the mastery of the bow was considered the absolute highest honor a man could achieve. In a small, dusty village at the edge of the Great Plains lived a young boy named Zikora. He was a quiet, observant child who spent his days watching the village hunters return from the deep forests. But Zakura did not just want to be a hunter. He carried a massive, burning dream in his heart to become the absolute greatest archer the continent had ever seen. His heavy obsession began on the day of the Great Sun Festival. The village gathered in the massive dirt courtyard to witness the arrival of an ancient, wandering grandmaster of the bow. The old man was a walking legend. He wore heavy, weathered animal skins, and strapped across his back was a massive, dark wooden bow deeply carved with glowing, ancient symbols. The grandmaster did not boast or demand attention. He simply walked to the center of the courtyard, holding a single heavy wooden arrow. The village elders challenged the grandmaster to prove his legendary skills. They placed a tiny, bitter cola nut perfectly balanced on top of a wooden post at the absolute farthest end of the courtyard, an impossible distance for any normal hunter to even see clearly. The courtyard went completely silent. Young Zikora pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his eyes wide with pure fascination. The grandmaster did not squint or stare at the target. Instead, he reached into his pouch, pulled out a thick, dark cloth, and tightly wrapped it around his own head, completely blinding his eyes. The old man stood perfectly still in the dirt. He raised the massive carved bow, resting the heavy arrow on the wood. He slowly pulled the thick string back, his muscles holding the heavy tension with completely effortless grace. The grandmaster explained to the silent crowd that the human eyes can easily be deceived by the sun, the wind, and the shadows, but a truly focused mind can see the exact path of the wind. Without warning, the old man released the string. The heavy arrow violently cut through the air with a loud, hissing whistle. It flew perfectly straight, crossing the massive distance in a heartbeat, and completely shattered the tiny cola nut into pieces. The entire village erupted into wild, deafening cheers, but young Zakura did not make a sound. He stood completely frozen, staring at the shattered target. In that exact moment, a heavy fire was ignited inside his soul. He realized that true mastery of the bow was not about physical strength or sharp eyesight. It was about the deep, unbreakable connection between the weapon and the mind. From that day forward, Zakura abandoned all childish games. He spent every waking hour in the harsh sun, carving his own small bows from flexible tree branches and shooting endless arrows into the tall grass, swearing a silent vow that he would one day surpass the grandmaster and unlock the heavy secrets of the wind. Young Zakura started practicing all alone in secret. Every single day, he pushed himself to the limit. Whenever his mother sent him on errands to the market or the stream, Zakura would take entirely too long. Instead of doing his simple tasks, he would stop at hidden corners of the village, shooting homemade wooden arrows at trees and rocks. When he finally returned home late, his mother would whip him out of anger. On several occasions, she searched his room, seized his handcrafted bows, and threw them directly into the cooking fire to burn. Zakura would cry bitter tears of anger as he watched his weapons turn to ash. But his heavy dream could not be burned. The very next day, he would sit in the bushes and craft another bow. He tried hiding them in new, difficult spots, but his mother always found a way to figure out his hiding places. This endless pattern of burning and rebuilding continued for a long time, until his mother finally got completely tired. Seeing that she could never break his stubborn will, she stopped burning his wooden bows and left him to his obsession. But practice was not easy. There were many days when Zakura got deeply frustrated and felt incredibly bad because his skills were nowhere near the level of the legendary grandmaster. He could hit normal targets accurately, but he wanted the impossible perfection he had witnessed. During one intense evening session, Zakura tied a dark cloth over his eyes, attempting to shoot blindfolded just like the grandmaster did. The result was a terrible failure. His arrow missed the target completely and vanished into the bushes. Boiling with furious anger at his own failure, Zakura hit the hard ground with his fists. But then he heard footsteps, someone quietly emerged from a hidden spot in the shadows. It was no other than the grandmaster himself, standing right before him. Zikora was completely overjoyed to see his hero. The old man gently tapped the boy on the shoulder, revealing that he had been secretly watching Zikora's struggles all this time. The grandmaster praised his heavy efforts, stating that he had never seen anyone as serious and dedicated as the young boy. Zakura quickly explained that he desperately wanted to be just like the grandmaster, but he felt like he was failing. The old man let out a soft laugh and taught the boy an important life lesson. He explained that absolutely no one becomes perfect in a single day, and that true perfection takes heavy time and endless effort. Without hesitation, Zikora asked for a massive favor, begging the grandmaster to train him. The old man accepted, but on one heavy condition. He stated that Zikora would have to pay a specific price to be his student, but this mysterious demand would only be met after the boy became perfect. The young boy eagerly accepted the strange deal, and the legendary training officially began. The grandmaster completely broke Zikora down to build him back up. He taught the boy exactly how to position his hands to balance the heavy tension of the string. He taught him pure, unbreakable focus. Several full moons passed, and Zikora became sharper and more perfect under the watchful eye of the master. The old man was deeply impressed by the boy's incredibly fast learning ability. Soon, Zikora learned to shoot from miles away, hitting tiny targets accurately without ever missing. He mastered the impossible art of knocking multiple arrows at the exact same time, releasing them to hit several different targets at completely different angles all at once. Despite his heavy skills, Zikora never boasted to the village. He remained quiet and humble, doing the exact opposite of what his noisy age mates were doing. The grandmaster also taught Zikora how to fight brutally with his bare fists, warning the boy never to rely solely on his bow in a close battle. But the most challenging part of the entire training was learning to shoot without sight. The grandmaster told Zikora that he could not physically teach him this specific skill. He explained that seeing without eyes relied entirely on pure, raw willpower. He told the boy he had taught him everything else he needed to know. The rest was up to him. Determined, Zikora kept trying. Then, one magical evening, it finally happened. Standing far away from the target, completely blindfolded, Zikora released the string. The arrow hit the exact center of the target, recreating the perfect shot the grandmaster had made on the first day they met. The proud expression on the old man's face said everything. The next day, Zikora excitedly waited at their usual hidden training spot, but the old man never showed up. Zikora searched the entire village, but he never found him. The grandmaster had completely disappeared, and absolutely no one saw him leave. Zikora even slept in the old man's empty hut, desperately hoping he would come back, but he never did. Zikora finally accepted the heavy truth that the master had moved on. But the old man had left a massive final gift behind. Resting at the edge of the hut was a heavy, beautifully crafted bow marked with strange, ancient symbols, along with 10 perfectly balanced arrows bearing the exact same markings. Zikora carefully kept the ancient weapon. As the moons passed, he continued training alone, honoring the master's teachings. Years later, Zikora grew into a young man. One day, he went deep into the thick bush to hunt for food. Moving silently through the trees, he spotted a large, healthy deer resting in a clearing. Zikora slowly positioned his arrow, preparing to take the shot. But in that exact moment, his sharp senses picked up a faint sound. He looked across the clearing and spotted the tip of another arrow pointing directly at the same deer from a different hiding spot. Acting with blinding, instinctual speed, Zikora instantly pulled a second arrow from his quiver and knocked both arrows onto his bowstring at the same time. He waited in complete silence. The moment the unknown hunter released his shot, Zikora fired his double counterstrike. The first arrow violently collided with the unknown hunter's arrow in midair, completely knocking it away from the target. A split second later, Zikora's second arrow struck the deer perfectly, dropping the game instantly. The unknown hunter stepped out from his hiding spot, visibly shocked by the impossible accuracy of the counterstrike. He was accompanied by a heavy, armed guard who immediately reached for his weapon. Seeing the guard, Zikora was afraid to come out at first. But the hunter raised his hand, stopping the guard, and assured the hidden shooter that he meant absolutely no harm. Finding his courage, Zakura stepped out of the bushes. As he got closer, he realized the man standing before him was no other than the supreme king of the land, who occasionally enjoyed hunting for exercise. The king was absolutely stunned to see that his fierce competitor was just a young man. Seeing the royal face, Zakura was scared he had committed a crime by stealing the royal kill. But the massive smile on the king's face assured him it was all good. The king heavily praised the young man, loudly declaring that he was deeply impressed and proud. He admitted he had never seen anyone shoot with such terrifying accuracy at such a young age. The king insisted that Zakura take the deer, assuring him he had fairly earned the prize. Before leaving the forest, the king extended a massive, life-changing invitation. He told Zakura that he wanted to see him at the Grand Palace soon. Lifting the heavy deer proudly onto his shoulder, Zakura bowed respectfully and headed back home. His life forever changed by a single perfect shot. The very next morning, Zakura traveled to the Grand Palace. The royal guards had been given strict orders to expect him, and he was immediately welcomed deep inside the king's personal chambers. The king proudly introduced the young man to his high chiefs and his supreme military general, boasting loudly that he had never in his life seen anyone with a hunting skill as perfect as Zakura's. The supreme general was deeply offended by the king's heavy praise. He quickly argued that the kingdom's elite archers were the absolute best across the entire continent. The general strongly doubted that a young, unknown boy could ever be better than his experienced, battle-tested masters of the bow. To settle the heavy debate, the general openly challenged the young boy to a public test of skill against the kingdom's greatest shooters. A massive crowd quickly gathered in the wide dirt courtyard of the palace to witness the event. 5 men, all far older and far more experienced than Zakura, stepped forward carrying their massive wooden bows. For the ultimate test of accuracy, the royal guards placed a single, tiny seed on top of a wooden carving at the absolute farthest edge of the courtyard. The distance was so great that the seed was almost invisible to the normal human eye. One by one, the 5 experienced masters stepped up to the shooting mark. They carefully drew their heavy bowstrings, taking their time to aim from the massive distance. All 5 men successfully hit the tiny target, proving their elite status. Watching them shoot, Zakura reacted with deep respect, nodding and acting genuinely amazed by their incredible skill. When it finally got to Zakura's turn, the crowd murmured in heavy doubt, fully expecting the young boy to fail under the intense pressure of the masters. But Zakura did something that completely shocked everyone in the courtyard. He reached into his pouch, pulled out a thick, dark cloth, and tightly wrapped it around his head, completely blinding his eyes. Then, he placed his arrow on the string and pulled it all the way back. Instead of facing the target, Zakura turned his head and faced the completely opposite direction. He entered a state of pure, absolute calmness, standing perfectly still in the dirt, listening only to the heavy whispers of the wind. This was not the first time he had performed the impossible. Without looking, Zakura released the arrow. The heavy crowd watched in absolute silence as the arrow flew with terrifying speed across the massive courtyard, perfectly shattering the tiny seed into dust. The entire palace instantly erupted in wild, deafening cheers. The king, the general, and the 5 master archers stood completely frozen, shocked at the impossible display of skill. But Zakura did not celebrate. He maintained his calm, solid position in the dirt, waiting patiently for the heavy crowd to quiet down. He pulled a second arrow from his quiver. Still completely blindfolded, he drew the string back and fired another impossible shot, hitting the exact same splintered target mark. He proved to the entire kingdom that his skill was absolutely not a stroke of luck. That very day, the deeply impressed king gave Zakura a massive royal offer, officially inviting him to join the kingdom's elite archers. The heavy news of the blindfolded boy who humbled the masters spread rapidly across every corner of the kingdom. Even his mother, who had spent years fighting his dream and burning his wooden bows, wept tears of pure joy and became incredibly proud of her son. The young boy who used to practice alone in the bushes was now heavily praised and completely respected by everyone in the land. A dark shadow fell over the kingdom when a terrifying, savage army from across the great desert violently invaded their borders. These invaders were not normal men. They marched in heavy, thick iron armor and carried massive, impenetrable shields that looked as hard as diamond. The king did not just send his elite archers to stop the threat. He deployed his entire heavy military force. Thousands of foot soldiers and archers marched to the border to defend their homeland. But when the two armies clashed, the battlefield instantly turned into a nightmare. The soldiers of Zikora's kingdom could not stand against the brutal strength of the enemy. The kingdom's elite archers rained thousands of arrows from the sky, but the wooden shafts were completely harmless. The arrows simply bounced off the heavy iron armor and thick shields of the invaders without leaving a single scratch. This was the very first time Zikora experienced the heavy, bloody reality of true war. Even as his brothers in arms fell around him, his extraordinary skills shined brightly through the chaos. He fought like a fierce predator. He knocked and shot multiple arrows at the exact same time, finding tiny gaps in the enemy helmets. In incredible moments of pure speed, he shot counterstrike arrows to violently knock enemy weapons out of the air, saving the lives of the soldiers fighting beside him. When Zakura completely ran out of arrows, he did not run away. He dropped his wooden bow and charged into the heavy enemy lines using his bare fists, fighting brutally just as the grandmaster had taught him. The supreme general watched Zakura from a distance and was deeply impressed by the young man's fearless heart. But individual bravery was not enough. The slaughter of the kingdom's elite soldiers and archers ran too deep. Seeing his army being completely destroyed by the unstoppable Iron Horde, the general was forced to call for a heavy, panic-filled retreat. The survivors fled back toward the kingdom, deeply crushed by the brutal defeat. The war was far from over, and the enemy was advancing. Preparing for the second and final battle, Zikora knew that normal weapons would never win this war. Sitting in silence, he made a heavy decision. He reached for the only thing he had that carried the memory of his great master, silently praying to meet the old man again one day. He brought out the massive, ancient bow and the 10 special arrows, all heavily marked with the same strange, glowing symbols. This was the very first time he would string and use the legendary weapon. When the two armies clashed again on the blood-stained dirt, the kingdom's soldiers were quickly pushed back. Their heavy swords and normal arrows still had absolutely no effect on the iron invaders. The kingdom's army began to draw back in pure fear, leaving a wide, empty space on the battlefield between themselves and the advancing enemy horde. Zikora stepped entirely alone into that empty space. He stood firmly in the dirt, raising the massive, ancient bow. This weapon was never an ordinary piece of wood. It was an ancient, magical artifact that had long ago chosen Zikora. It demanded a wielder with a pure heart, and it worked entirely through the power of imagination. Zikora knocked a single marked arrow onto the heavy string. He pulled it back, closing his eyes for a brief second. In his mind, he vividly pictured 50 heavily armored enemy soldiers rushing toward him. He imagined the exact spots where they stood. He released the string. The heavy arrow shot forward with a deafening whistle. Then, an impossible magic happened right before the eyes of both armies. In midair, that single arrow violently multiplied, instantly splitting into 50 glowing, identical arrows. The arrows did not fly in a straight line. They bent sharply through the air, violently twisting and turning to seek out the exact 50 targets Zikora had imagined. The magical arrows struck with devastating force, completely piercing through the impenetrable diamond-hard armor and heavy iron shields of the enemy as if they were made of dry leaves. The massive enemy horde stopped in their tracks, completely shocked. Before they could even understand what was happening, the craziest, most mysterious part of the ancient weapon revealed itself. The arrows that had just pierced the enemy did not stay in the bodies. They magically pulled themselves out and violently flew backward through the air, returning perfectly into Zikora's empty quiver without him moving a single muscle. Seeing the young man effortlessly wipe out their front line with a weapon that never ran empty, pure terror gripped the iron invaders. they realized they were not fighting a man, but a living god of the wind. The invaders dropped their heavy iron shields and weapons in the dirt, turning around and running away in absolute panic. Seeing the enemy break, the kingdom's soldiers let out a massive, deafening battle cry. They charged forward, aggressively pursuing the fleeing invaders until the threat was completely wiped out. They had won the impossible war. The incredible news of what happened on the bloody battlefield spread like wildfire across the entire kingdom. Zakura returned home not just as an elite archer, but as the supreme savior of the land. The kingdom respected him more than the king himself, and his mother wept tears of absolute joy, more incredibly proud of her son than she had ever been in her entire life. After the massive victory against the Iron Invaders, Zikora was given the highest seat of honor in the king's palace. The kingdom planned weeks of endless celebrations to praise their supreme savior. He had everything a young man could ever dream of: endless wealth, deep respect, and the absolute highest rank in the royal army. His mother was given a large, peaceful compound to live the rest of her days in total comfort. But amidst all the loud drumming and feasting, Zakura felt a strange, quiet pulling in his spirit. The ancient, marked bow resting in his room began to vibrate softly, letting out a faint, low hum that sounded exactly like a whistling wind. Zakura instantly knew what it meant. The weapon was guiding him. Without telling the king or the generals, Zakura packed his wooden quiver, strapped the magical bow to his back, and slipped out of the palace in the dead of night, following the invisible pull deep into the uncharted wilderness. Zakura walked for days until he reached the absolute highest peak of the Silent Mountains, a place completely hidden above the clouds. Sitting peacefully on a flat rock at the edge of the cliff was the legendary grandmaster. The old man looked exactly the same as the day he had vanished from the village. Zakura's heart filled with pure joy. He approached his great teacher and bowed deeply in heavy respect. He told the old man everything that had happened, how he had unlocked his mind, how the ancient weapon had chosen him, and how he had achieved absolute perfection to save his entire kingdom from destruction. The grandmaster nodded slowly, his face glowing with deep, silent pride. He acknowledged that Zakura had finally reached the highest peak of mastery. Then, the old man's face turned completely serious. He reminded Zakura of the unbreakable pact they had made in the bushes many years ago. The grandmaster had promised to teach him perfection, but on the condition that Zakura would pay a heavy price once that perfection was achieved. The grandmaster finally revealed his demand. He explained that the ancient, magical bow did not belong to the world of kings, palaces, or armies. The weapon of the wind required a guardian with no attachments. The price for his supernatural perfection was his normal life. The old man demanded that Zakura leave his royal titles, his fame, and his comfortable life in the palace completely behind. He was required to take the grandmaster's place as the eternal, silent watcher of the continent, living forever in the shadows to protect the innocent from the dark threats that armies could never defeat. Zakura looked down at the massive kingdom far below the mountain. He thought of his mother, knowing she was finally safe and well taken care of by the king. He realized that true perfection was not about standing in the light to be cheered. It was about sacrificing personal glory for the greater good. Without a single moment of hesitation, Zakura heavily accepted the grandmaster's terms. He handed over his royal kingdom badge to the old man, fully surrendering his past life. The grandmaster smiled one final time before turning around and walking peacefully into the thick mountain mist, completely disappearing into the wind forever. Zakura never returned to the palace. He became a ghost. For generations, evil warlords and corrupt kings whispered terrifying rumors of an unseen protector hiding in the deep forests. They spoke of a silent, supernatural archer who could bend arrows through the thickest trees and pierce the hardest iron, striking down evil from miles away before vanishing completely without a trace. Today, when people hear the name Green Arrow, they picture a modern comic book hero. They think of a spoiled billionaire who got stranded on a lonely island, learning to shoot a high-tech bow before returning to the big city to fight crime with explosive trick arrows and a fancy mask. But long before modern writers created the wealthy city vigilante, The true, raw legend of the ultimate archer was already carved into ancient history. He didn't need trick arrows filled with explosives. He wielded a magical, ancient weapon that allowed his mind to bend arrows around mountains and pierce through diamond-hard armor. He didn't fight for fame in a city. He gave up a life of absolute royalty to pay the heaviest price of all, becoming a selfless, eternal phantom of the wild. So, the next time you see the green arrow accurately pinning a bad guy to a wall on your screen, ask yourself, is he just a modern comic book creation? Or is he the forgotten shadow of Zikora, the legendary supernatural marksman who traded his entire life to become the absolute master of the wind?